Hello and welcome back. We're heading in towards the end of what's been a really insightful day, so thank you to those of you that are still with us. Earlier in the sessions, Helen highlighted how she was on a panel of a project that had just been absolutely amazing, but that she had had no direct involvement in. So I wanted to start this panel by saying this is Coventry Biennial's equivalent. Although we've not been at all involved in the Stephen project, we saw it multiple times at this year's Liverpool Biennial. It was the first video work at a biennial private view that I've sat through in its entirety, and then of course returned to multiple times over the summer just gone. So with that as an introduction, I will of course hand over to you both to if you could both describe your practice, your research, and perhaps introduce to the audience what Stephen is.
Okay, so I will start. Does this work already? Yeah, okay. My name is Lena Theodoropoulou. I have a very distant background in art theory from a very long time ago, but then I did a training in art therapy in a drug and alcohol center, and then I worked with people in recovery from drugs and alcohol, and then became a sociologist. I did a PhD in sociology, and I have a long-standing interest in creative practices with people in recovery from drugs and alcohol. And for the past few years, I have been working with mainly feminist epistemologies of care and Deleuze and Guattari and their concept of the assemblage to think about how we can describe the lived experiences of people in recovery and the daily practices of care that take place in recovery services. And then within this, I had worked with photography before, never with film. And then a few years ago, it's 2019, I met Melanie together with Nicole Vitellone, who's also part of this project, and she's also a lecturer in sociology at the University of Liverpool. And then we met Melanie in 2019, who was presenting her previous work, and she was just departing in this long journey of creating Stephen. This is how we started talking about it, and our collaboration and ongoing collaboration started. And that's me, and Melanie will say more about the project.
Hello, so my name is Melanie Morchaud. I'm a visual artist and filmmaker, and Stephen is my first feature film, which is about to be released cinematically in April. So my practice as a visual artist has really unfolded through a concern with how, as individuals, we might define ourselves through locational and relational practices and situate ourselves over and over again in relation to people, places, and things. And I work mainly through cameras. I started off with practice in photography. I studied photography at the Royal College of Art, and that evolved into working increasingly with film, video, and sound. And I would say that I use cameras not so much primarily to create images, but more to use the camera as a relational device, as an object around which we can articulate different kind of engagements with each other. And so the camera is really an organizing principle rather than a sort of image-making device for me. So to kind of describe Stephen a tiny bit, and it's such a long process and project, so I'll keep it short, and we will show a clip in a minute. It started probably 7 years ago and has been a long time in the making, partly because it is ambitious, and making a feature film coming from an artist practice is not entirely easy. So crossing over between the art world and film industry is not particularly straightforward and not very transparent. So it's taken quite a long time to get to the point of being able to make it. That was kind of then exacerbated by COVID, and so lots and lots and lots of permutations. But Stephen really originated out of an ongoing commitment to working with people in recovery from drug and alcohol. And I started Stephen really through a previous project called 12, where I met Stephen, who's given his name to this film. And Stephen is a young man who I met when he was 26. He had come into recovery. He was 2 weeks clean and sober. And I was making a piece of work called 12 in 2013. And he at the time was unusual in that you don't tend to go into full recovery at the age of 26. People tend to be a lot older than that and have many, many decades of abuse behind them. And he was interesting because, as it transpired, he was there not because the addiction was the primary problem. His suicidal tendencies and deep depression and anxiety were the main problems. And we became really close through the process, and he was extraordinary. The moment the camera turned on, it was like a Jekyll and Hyde, from this so slightly passive-aggressive young man. The moment there was a camera, was this empathetic, incredibly charismatic, bright young man. And I kept telling him that he had this power in front of the camera, that he could really transform himself, and he just wouldn't want to know. He wasn't interested at all until 6 months later he was enrolled in drama school and on his way to trying to become an actor. Fast forward 3 years, he had been in drama school, he had dropped out because he felt he would never make it, being a poor kid from the wrong side of the tracks and having no money. But if only once, he said to me, once in my lifetime I could do film and really show the world what I've got to give. Either then I can put it to rest, I've done it, I'm okay, or maybe something will happen. And I remember on that day, it was probably end of 2016, I said, okay, I'll write that film. And that's what Stephen is. So maybe we could run the trailer, and if possible, if we could dim the lights a tiny bit just so you can see it a tiny bit better.
You're gambling again, are you?
No. No, I'm not.
There's no shame in admitting it. There's no shame in asking for help.
Is everything all right? Stephen?
Yeah, sorry. My mum was an alcoholic. My brother, my middle brother, our Carl, he had problems with drink and with drugs as well. Everything was always to do with money. I can't bear money and the thought of money because it was just a stress from when I was a kid.
You don't like being labelled, or you do something about it and you change yourself, and that's why we're here. So, you know, I can't pretend, though I'm not an addict. I just go to groups where there's loads of addicts and sit around talking with them.
My name's Stephen Giddings and I'm here today to audition for the role of Thomas Goody.
Against your own. Shame on you.
Fucking sleeping bastards!
Fucking death.
Come on, leave me alone!
You got a choice, you know. Do you know that? It starts with this moment. Do something different.
So the film is made with a group of recovering addicts, and it's a mixed group of 4 professional actors and 16 people who are from different community and recovery services in Liverpool. But even the professional actors too have experience of mental health, neurodiversity, and addiction issues. And the film is a hybrid between documentary, observation, archive, and fiction. And the fiction is based on the first film ever made in Liverpool, which I discovered and was a little bit of a stroke of luck. is a film called The Arrest of Goody, which is a 7-minute film in the BFI archive. And The Arrest of Goody, made in 1901 by Victorian filmmakers, reconstructs the arrest of someone called Thomas Goody, who had embezzled £170,000 from the Bank of Liverpool. And you think, that's a lot of money. It's 21 million in today's money. So what happened? So what happened was that this person was an addict, and he was a gambling addict. So I thought, well, this is amazing. I'm working with a group of people who are in addiction and recovery in Liverpool, and the first film ever made in Liverpool is about gambling addiction. So how about we propose that we use the lived experience of these people to reimagine and rethink and reconstruct the reconstruction, this Victorian reconstruction, but think about the connections between substance addiction, alcohol addiction, and gambling addiction. And so that, I mean, there's a lot more to say, but that brings me back to sort of talking maybe more in conversation with Lena, that we met literally, again, another stroke of luck, and coincidentally, literally as I was just starting to work on this, when I gave a talk about 12, this previous project where I'd met Stephen and talked about addiction recovery and filmmaking, and how I believe that filmmaking is quite an extraordinary creative practice for and with people in addiction recovery, because it allows something that we talk about quite a lot. It allows processes of fabulation, of reinvention, of thinking anew about who you are, and possibly reconstructing a sense of self. But it's also a collective practice. Filmmaking is inevitably and at its very core a collective creative practice. And bringing people together to create something together is very powerful.
Can I just add one more thing about Melanie's work? Actually, when I first saw her work 12, what I found fascinating is that a research element and a care was very much present. Like, even with 12, you had worked with people for 2 years before. It was not a case of someone picking up a camera because they have the skills and filming people telling stories. It was about, okay, how do we say this story together? How do you drive this? But I bring the aesthetics, I bring the skills, I bring the time. I give you time to tell your story. And for me, that was something very new that I had not seen very often at all, how much time an artist spends with their participants. And yeah, for me, that was my main. I was like, oh my God, it's amazing. It would be great. I knew it would be great to work with Melanie, because she's not an artist that you have to, like, she was doing research already. Maybe it wouldn't have been, phrased as research, but it was very interesting to see.
And I think that's where I had a question around, of course, you highlighted that filmmaking is intrinsically collaborative, but there isn't always a research basis within that. And there's certainly not always a researcher sort of embedded in the project. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you two worked together during the project, and of course with the other researcher as well, and what that looked like practically over the number of years as you were developing the film.
So maybe I start and then I hand back over to you. So when we met, interestingly, I was about to start going into Liverpool, recruiting a group of individuals who were interested in working with me. And when I say recruit, that is very much an open call. So I tend to work with existing services and organizations, institutions, and put out an open call, and people come, and I don't select ever. So whoever turns up is part of the project and will be integrated into the work no matter what. And so we just met, and then Lena and Nicole came, we came on board really quickly, and we had conversations pretty quickly and decided that we would want to work together. And so Lena and Nicole were part of the very, very first meetings with groups of people and we organized it at the University of Liverpool. And the way I tend to work initially is that I run a lot of workshops, and these workshops are first and foremost incredibly safe, and they are private. So we film doing them, we bring lots of cameras, we equip people with the agency to operate themselves, so they get the tools of the production. They film themselves, they film each other, they learn how to operate all the kind of kits, whether it's sound, camera, they start writing. They interrogate each other, they collect stories, but it's all private. So it's just for us. And the second thing that is really important is to form a language and to form a joint language. So that means we watch a lot of films together. We select movies that we feel are relevant to the group, to each other, but it's not me selecting the films, it's all of us, everybody in the group proposes films, and we watch these films together and discuss them, so that we can start having a language that we share, a visual language and a real spoken language. And that's also what I feel we did initially, is to kind of form language together. Because I think it's sometimes, it's an assumption that collaborative research necessarily works, or that we all speak the same language. We don't necessarily speak the same language. We don't necessarily mean the same things when we use words. We need to actually fine-tune what is meant by certain expressions, whether they're visual expressions, sonic expressions, textual expressions, and find a language that we can use together so that we actually understand each other. So we also did quite a lot of reading together as a group, the three of us, to kind of figure out, well, what are the kind of texts that would be useful to us as a shared ground from which to then speak together. So maybe you carry on from there.
Yeah, so as I said, I do have kind of a long-standing interest in Deleuze and Guattari and what kind of terminology they give us to describe certain connections that are difficult to describe. And we started reading together a lot, and we have been thinking a lot with minor practice and with fabulation. So minor practice is basically the idea that we have to pay attention to small transformations rather than big gestures. And this is something that Melanie was doing through the workshops, which is the first stage of the project, when we were looking at how people engage with the camera, how they tell stories slightly different, what else becomes possible. And then for the filming of Stephen, I think then we focused more on fabulation, which has to do with breaking this binary, the boundaries between the virtual and the actual, where it doesn't matter anymore what's real and what's not real. What matters is the story that is being collectively produced. From a research perspective, I think unlike some other projects where artists were commissioned by researchers, I think it was the other way around for us. Melanie had a very clear vision of the project, the work, how things would be. Obviously, it is a process, so a lot of things changed, but that was an original idea that Melanie had and implemented, and we were observing this process and maybe bringing theoretical and methodological element into it.
Yeah, and I think expanding as well. So I think the collaboration most definitely expanded my frame of reference, and in a sense, it made me think anew about what I'm doing, which is kind of amazing when in terms of having a practice as an artist and filmmaker, you always try and kind of challenge how you do things and do it different next time and learn and progress, and you're not standing still. But through the collaboration, through this now 4-year conversation, and I think that's the sort of thing that it is. It's a huge conversation. It's a discussion. My frame of reference has expanded exponentially. And that's been one of the kind of incredible benefits of us having this commitment to talking to each other.
I think something we've heard a lot today is that time is so crucial, and hearing from you both that it's been a 4-year conversation. I think that's perhaps the longest time period that we've heard of. Was 4 years enough? Were there things that you might have liked to have done? And
Hasn't
I guess
still going.
It hasn't finished. So that's when I was actually, when I listened to some of you earlier on, saying, well, we're still in the middle. So in practical terms, Stephen, the film, exists in 2 forms. It's a feature film that will be released, like I said, in April, but it's an installation that you saw at Liverpool Biennial. And both of those literally have just, the distribution and dissemination of the work is just starting. So it was at Liverpool Biennial, but we're working on an exhibition tour, which hopefully will go to potentially 5-6 venues around the country, potentially up till 26, 27, so quite a few years ahead of us. And then the film will go to lots of communities. It will go to lots of recovery centers. So every time it's an exhibition, it goes off to very particular kind of community settings and will be shown. And what's important about that is that our cast, who are the kind of like people who we made the film with and who are in recovery, will lead those community screenings. So we have started to train them so that they kind of, again, they have the kind of, in a sense, the kind of tools of production. They have agency. They, rather than me doing these community screens, it's them going to do community screens, which is incredibly powerful. We've done a few of them. Last year, we're doing another one on the 31st of January in Liverpool. To be in a room where there are people who are struggling either with mental health or recovery or any kind of any of the kind of issues that are present in the film, but being shown the film by people who come from this background and have some of these experiences themselves, but also maybe have some ideas and some advice or just empathy, lived empathy, is incredibly powerful. So that's ongoing, and Lena and Nicole are completely involved in that for the next few years. So it's been 4 years so far, but it might be another 4 years.
And we are also very much interested in the policy implications of this project. Maybe I should have said at the beginning that a big part of the project, at least from a theoretical and policy-driven perspective, is how do we challenge what recovery means in policy at the moment, whereas there's a lot about the recovered subject, like the person that has to be clean of drugs and alcohol, returns to employment, etc. But our participants tell a different story of recovery as a process of connections, as something that doesn't necessarily have to do with abstinence, but how do you create different options? How do you build life possibilities? And this project has been a big part of that. So we want to go back and see how can all this work that Melanie has done be translated into a different context, and, for example, be part of a filmmaking creative project within different recovery services. And our participants are their testimonies. We've done a series of interviews with them following the completion of the project, and their involvement in disseminating the film is also very important in terms of them sharing their experiences and helping us to think how this can be taken further and translated and have an impact on policy. Of course, we know policymakers don't really listen to social scientists that much, but we can, nor artists, yeah, but it's important to pilot these things and then try and see how they work and if they work.
The last thing I wanted to ask you both, I'm aware we're sort of up against time a little bit, and I do want to give our audience an opportunity to ask you questions, but the one thing that really spoke to me about seeing the installation at Liverpool, and we spoke a little bit about this earlier, was how embedded the work was in place. In the trailer, some of that came across with just the accents of the people in the work, the immediate landscape, the setting. I wonder if you could both speak a little bit about the particularities of working in a site-specific way. Of course, what that might mean for a university with a place name attached to it, but also what that will mean as you start to tour the work. And of course, there are really universal themes and issues present in the project. But yeah, perhaps you could speak to how you imagine that unfolding as it tours and as it shifts to a cinema format.
So I think there's lots of answers to this. So like I said at the beginning, locational research is really important to me, because I do believe that both as individuals, but also in our collective sense of being as social beings, we are inherently linked to locations and to places, to the particularities of environments, of cultures. And so I think it being so, we developed it in Liverpool over such a long period of time, and everybody in the film, bar one person who's from London, comes from Liverpool. They're all very much from the city. So arguably, in some ways, it's also a portrait of the city. And it will come back into the city at the very end of its tour. It's going into the collection of the Walker Art Gallery, which is great because then it's held there forever in perpetuity. It's great legacy. It means the city can show it whenever they want in various shapes or form, as an installation, as a screening, as a one-off event. So it can have a life within the city and be held there. And that's really important.